Hi biologists, this is Miss R and we're going to talk about the material you need to know for quiz 3.04 and 3.06. It's all about cells. Cell theory, remember, has three different rules. All living things are composed of cells. That's all living things. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. So anything that's living, the basic unit of that living thing is cells. And you might have a trillion or a billion, or you might just have one if you're a bacteria. And all cells are produced from other cells. If you want to make more bacteria, you have to have at least one to start with. If you want to make another cell in a human body, you have to have a cell to divide it from. So remember that third rule, all cells are produced from other cells. They don't just appear out of nowhere, which was an original thought people had several hundred years ago, before cell theory was conceived. When we organize cells, we start thinking about complex organisms by thinking about specialized cells. Those specialized cells, for instance, your heart cells, are organized. All the heart cells get together and make tissues, like muscle tissue. And that muscle tissue is in an organ, like your heart. So you have specialized cells getting together to make tissues. Those tissues make organs, and those organs all work together to make organ systems, like your heart is part of your circulatory system. So let's try to remember, what was the organizational level between cells and organs? When you have a bunch of specialized cells and they're all together, what do they make? Well, they probably don't make a cell. They don't make an organ system because you have to have more than one organ or parts of organs together. It definitely doesn't make an organism. What we're talking about is tissues here. Here are some fat tissue as an example. And if we go back to our diagram here, organelles, parts of a cell, are down here in the order of organization here. So let's talk about organelles. Specialized cells, cells in multicellular organisms called eukaryotes, generally have different parts to their cells. Their cells are very organized, and organelles are what help the cell stay nice and organized. And here just an example of some of the parts, some of the organelles found in a eukaryotic cell. And we'll talk more about eukaryotes in a minute. Let's talk about a couple important pieces of the cell. The middle of the cell is called the nucleus, and there's some important stuff in there. Organelles are tiny structures that carry out a specific function within the cell. The nucleus is an example of an organelle. It helps keep the cell organized. Remember, organelles are little parts inside the big cell comparatively that help keep it organized. The nucleus has a security system around it called the nuclear envelope, and that's part of the nucleus, which is an organelle. It forms the outer boundary of the nucleus. It only allows certain materials to move in and out of the nucleus. And the reason that the nucleus is so important that it needs a nuclear membrane, basically a security guard like this guy, is that it contains something very, very important. And if you look at this picture here, you realize what's really important that's in the nucleus is DNA. DNA contains all of the instructions for everything that goes on in the cell. So the nucleus needs a good security guard, a nuclear membrane, to protect the DNA. Another important organelle or cell part is called the mitochondria. Here's a picture of a mitochondria, and although some ATP is made in the cytoplasm, most of it is made in the mitochondria. Mitochondria are kind of the power plant of the cell here. It produces ATP for the cell, and we all know that ATP stays in the cell and makes things happen in the cell. If you want to get work done in the cell, you need a lot of ATP. In plant cells, they have a very special organelle. In plants, they have a chloroplast, and a chloroplast is kind of like solar panels for the cell. It changes light energy into chemical energy. We know that a light energy with carbon dioxide and water in the chloroplast here is turned into chemical energy for plant cells only. You, unfortunately, and animals don't have chloroplast. You can't photosynthesize. So this is for plant cells only. Chloroplasts are only for plant cells. They act like solar panels, so you can think of a little house with solar panels on the roof. You might see one of those driving around in your neighborhood. It's just like a chloroplast for the cell. It's soaking up sunlight and using that energy to store energy in the cell, just like you might store energy in your house in a battery. So there are two major types of cells that we've been talking about in this unit. Eukaryotic cells are really organized. They have organelles. Prokaryotic cells, like bacteria, are more of a hot mess inside. They're not as organized. They don't have tidy little parts like eukaryotes. Prokaryotes don't have a nucleus, and they don't have membrane-bound organelles. They're kind of just a bunch of stuff floating around in a big bag. That's a very simple analogy, but that's what bacteria are. And bacteria are very complicated little organisms that can talk to them, and they're very cool, but what makes them so cool is they're pretty simple sometimes. Eukaryotes are you. You are a eukaryote. Your cells have a nucleus and organelles. They're organized. The organelles inside eukaryotic cells make them organized. What is a prokaryote, that's bacteria, missing that a eukaryote has? Well, we know it's not chocolate sprinkles. Both of them have DNA. You can see DNA here in the prokaryote we're looking at. Both of them have proteins or they wouldn't exist. They might have, prokaryotes have lipids, and what a prokaryote is missing is a nucleus. There's no center big glob in this bacteria cell. It's just kind of a mess in there. There are no organelles to organize it. So no nucleus, no organelles in a prokaryote. You can probably figure out which one has organelles. It's right here. The eukaryote, which is you and other animals, have organized cells that have a true nucleus. Eukaryote means true nucleus. Let's try to remember what plant cells have that animals don't. You might remember the phrase plants can't dance. That's because they have a cell wall that keeps their cell rigid. They aren't squishy like humans. They also have chloroplasts. The green stuff in plant cells is chloroplasts, which contain chlorophyll, which help turn light energy in along with carbon dioxide and water. That light energy drives the reaction photosynthesis to make glucose. Thanks for coming. If you have any questions, I'll see you in office hours.